This project is to remove a surface mount board from a prototype motherboard and mount it onto the newest revision of the same board. The surface mount board is connected to the prototype motherboard by about 60 odd solder mount points. The first step that I'm doing here is to cut away the edges of the fiberglass from the old prototype board using a rotary cutting tool. I'm going to apply this sanding tool on the rotary tool, and I'm going to use that to sand away the fiberglass that's around the mount points that are connecting the two boards together. This is a pretty terrible way to accomplish this task. Often what people will do is to use a hot plate or a frying pan or something on the stove to heat up the board until the solder melts. Then they can just remove the surface mount board while the solder is liquid. I don't have a hot plate and I don't really want to get solder all over my frying pan. So I'm not going to do that. And in any case, this is way more fun. What I'm doing here is I'm gently brushing the sanding tool against the fiberglass until there's a hole. And you can see the hole. Right around now you can just see the blue peeking through. That's the blue from the solder mask of the board underneath. And as long as you're pretty careful, it's safe to do this. The boards aren't glued together or anything in this case. So the fiberglass should just come apart. And eventually I'll be able to pull away that big middle part. And what will be left is just a bit of fiberglass stuck to the solder pads on the surface mount board. When that's done, at this point it's easy to grab the soldering iron and one at a time melt the solder that's bonding the fiberglass to the surface mount board and pull away the fiberglass from the solder pad one or two at a time until there's no more fiberglass stuck on the board. It's really a job for about 2.5 hands, but with some dexterity it's pretty easy. You have to remember that fingernails are great thermal insulators. Skip ahead here, and once the prototype board, the remaining fiberglass has been removed fully from the surface mount board, I give it a brush with my soldering iron, make sure everything's clean, there aren't any shorts, all the remaining copper has been washed off, and then go get my attractive red nail polish, and I use that to touch up the surface mount board. In case there are any holes in the solder mask, you don't want to expose the bare copper underneath. Apply a bit of nail polish to make sure everything's sealed off and covered and safe. Once that's dry, I mount a new interface board onto this handy wooden jig and line up the surface mount board on top of it, and then, one by one, I solder the pads to the new board. Apply a bit of flux there, particularly important at this juncture. On the left-hand side of the board, the solder pads, you can see there, it is a bit more important to use that flux because the flux that's within the solder gets burned off because I have to apply the solder to the tip of the soldering iron above the board. I can't stick them both in there at the same time because of those two switches. And then I use my magnifying loupe to double check for shorts and then move on to the other side. You can see that the surface mount board isn't sitting flush on the interface board. That's because there's still a bit of solder underneath, and also because of the nail polish, it's just lifting it off a little bit, but that's fine, no problem. I triple check all the connections, make sure there aren't any shorts. In fact, there are a couple shorts, just 2 pins are shorted there, so I clean it out with soldering iron, gouge it out with the utility knife, just to make sure there's no crud in there, and that's done.